Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to hit rank 5 with on the arena ladder. As you can see from the screenshot here, I'm currently 64-10 with this list, including a 31-2 run since I swapped out Glimpse the Core for Bramble Familiar, which I think was a really big change for the deck, so it's been performing incredibly well for me. Now, I did have a little bit further to climb than usual this week because I was testing out a bunch of new cards in preparation for the Historic Qualifier, which did tank my rank a little bit, not going to lie. Speaking of which, for you Historic players, the next two deck guides that I got coming up are going to be both in Historic, one of which is going to be covering the deck I played in the Qualifier, and the other one is going to be covering the deck that I almost played in the Qualifier. Now, sorry for the slight delay in getting those out. I was going to just immediately post the Qualifier deck. However, shortly after the Qualifier, I came up with what I thought was a slightly better version of the deck, so I wanted to take a little bit more time and test that version to make sure it was good, which I think it is, and I also wanted to take a little bit of time to update both of those lists to take into account the new Discover decks that have propped up recently, so sorry for the delay on those, but those two will both be coming out soon. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my red-green Dino Durin ramp deck in Alchemy. So this is essentially a ramp deck with a lot of Dinosaur synergies that also has this card Doors of Durin as another angle of attack, and I think this card is really, really powerful. I think it's one of the most underrated cards in Alchemy right now. It's a 5-mana artifact from the Lord of the Rings set, and whenever you attack, you scry 2 and reveal the top card of your library, and if it's a creature card, you get to put it into the battlefield tapped and attacking. So I think that the reason why I think this card works so well in a ramp shell is that, first of all, it just gives us really good redundancy for our top-end creatures, right? Obviously, in a ramp shell, we want to be running top end like Italian Trumpeting Carnosaur are the main two cards in this particular list, and Doors of Durin works really well because it gives us more redundancy for these cards, because not only can we ramp into them and hardcast them, but we can also cheat them into play early off the Doors of Durin. And then additionally, since we're running a lot of ramp, we can ramp into the Doors of Durin early, and getting this down on turn 4 and then immediately triggering it by attacking is so powerful, and just not only enables you to get ahead on the board, but also just snowballs the game really quickly as well, because the really powerful thing about Doors of Durin is as long as you're consistently at least putting one creature into play off it every single trigger, it snowballs the game so quickly, because even if the opponent is able to block the creature that you attack with, the other creature they're unlikely to be able to block, especially if it's a big one, and then you can just attack with that next turn, get another creature. So not only is it a really effective way of us cheating our big creatures into play, but it's also just really snowbally card that puts a bunch of card advantage into play and also applies a bunch of pressure, especially in this list where we have so many creatures that have trample like Itali, Trumpeting Carnosaur and Oliphant. The other really nice thing about Doors of Durin is it also synergizes incredibly well with the land cyclers that we've got here. So we've got 4 Oliphant, 4 Generous Ent, which essentially in this deck count as tapped lands in the early game because they can fetch us lands. But in this particular list, they're actually slightly better than tapped lands because we have very few turn 1 plays. We've only got Delighted Halfling in the main deck, and so very often if we don't have Delighted Halfling, we can just play an untapped land on turn 1 and then cycle these so that it's essentially an untapped land going into turn 2 as well. But as creatures, not only are they more top end for us to ramp into if we do have ramp and not much else going on, but they also really maximize our chances of hitting something high impact off the Doors of Durin, which is really sick, right? Hardcasting these as 6 drops are, decent, but cheating them into play off Doors of Durin is so powerful, especially Oliphant that can force through trample damage, but even Generous Ent is very good at forcing through extra damage, but the reach and the food token is also very nice at stabilizing against other aggressive decks as well. So these two really ensure that we can have consistent hits off Doors of Durin, which is really sick. So Doors, such a powerful card in this deck, and is such a powerful engine. Once, if you can get this into play and start triggering it, there are very few decks that can beat that because of how snowbally this card is. So next up, we'll have a closer look at the top end of the deck. So starting off here with Italia, which is definitely the most powerful card in the deck, and it's especially good in this deck because we have so much top end to ensure that Doors of Durin is good, which means that we're very consistently going to be hitting stuff like Trumpeting Carnosaur, the Land Cyclers, or even Doors of Durin itself, which is really powerful. So Italia, very, very high impact because of the number of top end cards that we've got in the deck, and additionally because of the amount of ramp that we've got in the deck, we do actually transform this a good amount as well, especially of cards like Hulking Raptor or Chapter 2 of Roar of the Fifth People. Transforming Italia into Primal Sickness is a really good way of breaking board stalls. There are a number of other decks in the format that are good at building up a big board as well, and being able to transform Italia into Primal Sickness, especially as we get towards Chapter 4 of Roar of the Fifth People that I'll get to a little bit later, just enables you to completely break through the board stalls. Now, the reason that I'm only running 3 copies of Italia here is because it is pretty bad to draw in multiples early on, right? We can ramp ramp into it, but you don't really want to be drawing too many. And we can also tutor it off Roar of the Fifth People as well, so we can find it pretty consistently. But 3 has felt like a good amount. I don't really want to run 4 because I just, as I mentioned, it can be clunky to draw in multiples, and there's just space issues in the deck as well. I think every other card in the deck is more important than the 4th copy of Atali. Then next up we've got Trumpeting Carnosaur, which is a new card from Ixalan, and this is such a big addition to the decks because not only does it give you additional top end, which is really powerful, especially when we've got Doors of Durin and a lot of ramp in the deck, but it also gives us a way to interact in the early game, which is so big. So I've tried Doors of Durin ramp previously to Ixalan, and the biggest issue I had with the deck is the deck really incentivizes you to run Doors of Durin and a very, very high creature count because you really want to hit a consistently good card off the Doors of Durin every single time. And the big issue with that is that you don't really have good options for interaction. Previously I was having to run 4 copies of Kola and Yadaro as interaction, which is not only very vulnerable to instant speed removal, but also doesn't really come online until turn 5 at the earliest in a lot of situations, whereas Trumpeting Carnosaur doubles up as a top-end creature that also gives you early interaction, so it really fills a hole in the deck that it's had in the past as well. And we also have some other ways to interact as well, like It's Squiff that I'll get to a little bit later. But Trumpeting Carnosaur, really, really nice as early interaction. That's great to ramp into, great to put into play off Doors of Durin. Going Trumpeting Carnosaur into Doors of Durin is a really powerful sequence as well. And we also got a lot of very high impact cards to hit off this. Speaking of which, I didn't really mention this earlier, but the way this deck is built, the only real whiff off Doors of Durin are obviously lands, which we don't run too many because of the land cyclers, right? We only have 18 actual lands, which means that Doors is going to hit very consistently because of that. But in terms of the actual creatures themselves, the only complete whiff really is Delighted Halfling in this deck. I mean, even then, if you need to give your creatures uncounterable against the control deck, it's pretty good. But outside of that, every other creature in the deck is useful. Even if we hit a Paleontologist or a Bramble Familiar, they're both cards that can give us value as the game goes on, either by being able to cast our dinosaurs from the graveyard or bouncing Bramble Familiar back to our hand to reuse this fetch quest as well. So we have very, very consistent hits off Carnosaur and Doors of Durin, which is a very big deal as well. So yeah, Carnosaur, really, really big as early interaction that doubles up as another threat at the top end. Then we've also got Hulking Raptor here, which is very, very nice as a ramp tool. The Ward 2 on this card is so, so big, right? Especially if you can ramp into this on turn 3. It's very difficult for the opponent to kill this unless they immediately have something like a Shieldred's Edict. And then getting an extra 2 mana opens up huge, huge plays for the following turn. So if we can get this down on turn 3, and then we have the land for the turn, we can either cast Atali or fetch quest off Bramble Familiar the following turn, which is so powerful. Getting Atali down on turn 4 or Bramble Familiar into an Atali or a Carnosaur is so big. Even if we get, Hulking Raptor down on turn 5, getting an Atali or a fetch quest down on turn 5 is huge as well. We can use it to ramp into Carnosaur, we can use it to ramp into Doors of Durin as well. And we also have a bunch of other mana sinks in the deck that are really nice as well that we can use this with, such as transforming Huatli or pumping the mana into Paleontologist to exile a card from the graveyard, or bouncing a Bramble Familiar back to our hand to reuse for the fetch quest. So the mana that we get off Hulking Raptor is so, so useful with a bunch of different cards in the deck. It's very difficult to kill. It's also very impactful to hit off Doors of Durin because it's 5 power. It's nice to boost with the Oliphant because we can give it trample as well to force through even more damage. So Hulking Raptor, such a sweet card in the deck for sure. And then because we're running a bunch of dinosaurs anyway in Raptor, Carnosaur and Atali, that also enables us to run some cards that give us bonuses when we're running dinosaurs. For example, we've got It Squint in the deck, which is a really big card because, again, as I mentioned, previous versions of Doors of Durin really lacked interaction, and It Squiff is such a sweet card in this deck because we can play this just for 4 mana to just kill, deal 2 damage to a creature, which kills a lot of early creatures. Killing stuff like Delighted Halfling and Crucius with this is really big. But once we do have our bigger dinosaurs in play, like the Raptor, Carnosaur or Atali, we can then use this to pick off much bigger creatures like opposing Atraxas, or just, once we have a Hulking Raptor in play, we can use it to kill Shieldred, and then the Ward 2 makes it very hard for the opponent to fizzle as well. So It Squint is such a nice addition to this deck because it pads out the curve and just gives us extra interaction while still keeping the creature count very high. And as I mentioned, it's another good card that is good to hit off Doors of Durin. Once we have a dinosaur in play, flipping an It Squint while we have 2 extra mana just allows us to pick off another one of the opponent's creatures as well. So It Squint and Trumpeting Carnosaur really fill that hole of creatures that also deal with opposing creatures that was a big weakness of Doors of Durin decks in the past. And then we also get Intrepid Paleontologist here, which is such a big addition to the deck as well, which is a mana dork that also doubles up as graveyard hate, which does come up against certain decks, especially with Descend being a new mechanic. I have seen a few graveyard decks popping around, but the main use of this card is enabling us to recast our dinosaurs from the graveyard, which is so powerful with basically all of them, right? Being able to rebuy It Squith is the cheapest one, and also just enables us to kind of loop interaction. Now, the Dinosaur that you do get back does come with a finality counter, but if you have multiples of these, you can get, 2 or 3 removal spells off this, which is really powerful. Getting back Hulking Raptor is really nice, but very importantly, getting back Carnosaur and Atali, especially Carnosaur, because we can use this as a removal spell to get it into the graveyard in the early game, then, exile it with the Paleontologist, and then just recast it to get the Discover as well. So Paleontologist, obviously we want to be ramping in this deck. We want to have creatures that ramp in this deck so we have good hits off the Doors of Durin, and it also acts as kind of like a grinding late game engine as well. So Paleontologist does so much in the deck as well. And then in addition to that, we also have Huatli, Poet of Unity, which isn't a dinosaur itself, but does come with dinosaur synergies. Now, this card doesn't ramp us, it doesn't put lands onto the battlefield, but putting a land into hand off a 3-drop is really nice as well. We are only running 24 lands if you count these as land cyclers, and especially against very interactive decks, it is important for us to keep hitting land drops, right? Because 24 lands with so many mana dorks might seem like quite a high amount in such a ramp deck like this, but as I mentioned, a lot of decks in the format right now are running a lot of interaction, especially the black decks, and so you can't really rely on your mana dorks surviving, and so Huatli just ensuring that we consistently keep the land drops flowing is really big. And then the ability to transform this is so huge. Roar of the Fifth People not only means that Huatli counts as both ensuring that we keep hitting land drops, but is also kind of a ramp payoff in and of itself because it has its own mana sink. But Roar of the Fifth People is a really sick way to grind and a win condition in and of itself. I think the best card to break board stalls is Roar of the Fifth People. So when you transform it, you immediately get 2 3/3 dinosaur tokens, which is already pretty good for 5 mana straight away. It gets board presence, which is very good against the aggro decks if you need to block, and also just good at applying pressure. Then Chapter 2 allows us to turn all of our creatures into mana dorks, which then enables us to ramp into any cards that we've got stuck in our hand, like Atali, Doors of Durin, Trumpeting Carnosaur, etc. Then Chapter 3, we can search for any dinosaur in the deck, so most of the time we're going to be searching for Atali. So the really nice thing about Huatli is, even if we are against these disruptive black decks that have stuff like Juggernaut Peddler, discard spells, early removal, Huatli in and of itself, if we can get to a point where we can transform this, just enables us to get 2 3/3s on the board and then immediately just tutor for our top end card as well. So Huatli is just so good for 3 mana. And then we also get Chapter 4 where all of our dinosaurs get double strike and trample, and this is definitely the best way to break a board stall. So if you are against an opponent and they do have a pretty big board, transforming Huatli and then getting Atali and then potentially transforming it going into the turn of Chapter 4 is just a really good way to completely break board stalls as well. So Huatli, such a sick card in this deck for sure, and I'm definitely happy that I'm running 4 copies even though it's legendary, because if you ever get to transform this, you're usually just going to win the game from that point. And then in terms of the other cards in the deck, we've obviously got Delighted Halfling here, which is definitely the best 1 mana dork in the format, and the ability to give our legendary spells uncounterable is very big against the control decks, particularly getting Huatli down on turn 2 is very big because then they constantly have to hold up interaction because we represent transforming it. But very importantly, it also gives Doors of Durin and Atali uncounterable, which is a very big deal as well. And also Ren and Realmbreaker out the sideboard, which is one of our most important cards against the control decks. There's also another 1 mana dork that came out in the latest set that only works with dinosaur spells, but since a lot of our mid-game stuff isn't dinosaur stuff like Huatli and Doors of Durin, I wasn't very high on that. I think Delighted Halfling is just the best option at the 1-drop slot that we've got. And then we've also got Bramble Familiar, which, like I said, is the most recent addition to the deck. I was originally running Glimpse the Core, which puts a land into play, but Bramble Familiar just seems so much better to me because, first of all, it's a creature, so it just keeps the creature count high for Doors of Durin. But it's also just, really good in this deck because it doubles up as early game ramp that is also a late game payoff. As I mentioned, once we get to 7 mana, we have both Atali and Bramble Familiar to try and hit these very high impact cards as well. So Bramble Familiar, such a sweet card in this deck because, as I said, it just doubles up as early ramp and also just a late game win condition that we can also just keep reusing. Oftentimes we can get to these mid games where we have a bunch of mana off, multiple Hulking Raptors, and being able to cast the Bramble Familiar and then bounce it back to our hand and reuse for Fetch Quest does come up quite often as well. So Bramble Familiar, really integral part of the deck as well. Then in terms of the mana base, as I mentioned, we've got a pretty low land count in this deck because of the land cyclers and Oliphant and Generosent. In terms of the lands themselves, we've got obviously the good red-green dual lands in Copperline Gorge and Carplusen Forest, and then the rest are all basics, and then Wooded Ridgeline is here as a dual land that we can fetch off Oliphant and Generosent. So this comes up most often when we have, just forests and Generoscent, we can then cycle the Generoscent to find a red source, which is pretty important. Or, sometimes we'll have all mountains and Oliphant, and we can use Oliphant to find the wooded ridgeline as well. Now, it might look a little bit weird that I'm not running other lands. Some considerations, there's the new red-green creature land, which is actually pretty nice in this deck with Doors of Durin, because especially against decks that are good at keeping you off the board, Doors of Durin can be a little bit sketchy, because for it to be effective, you need to be attacking, which is another reason why Itzquith is so good as well, because it has haste. If the opponent does clear our board with the Doors of Durin, being able to go Itzquith with haste, attack, and then trigger it immediately is pretty big. And that is a reason why I was kind of looking to run the red-green creature land, because having a creature land that we can fire up and attack to trigger Doors of Durin when we have no other creatures in play is pretty big. However, I just didn't think it was worth it, because like I said, Oliphant and Generoscent kind of count like tap lands in the deck, which means that we're already essentially running 9 tap lands in the deck, and I really didn't want to be running any more. And then some other people might be asking why I'm not running Cavern of Souls in this deck when I'm running so many, high-impact dinosaurs. And the main reason is that we need enough green sources on turn 1 for Delighted Halfling. Having Delighted Halfling on turn 1 is so important. And without going, 6 forest and then the 8 extra dual lands, we're not going to have enough mana. And we really don't want to be using Cavern of Souls to name Halfling in this deck either, which is another really big thing. And then you also might be wondering why I'm not running Forsaken Crossroads either. And the main reason, again, is Delighted Halfling. I really want to be casting Halfling on turn 1, even on the play. And having the Forsaken Crossroads enter tapped early on, meaning that we can't cast Halfling on turn 1 is a pretty big deal. And I don't feel like I ever have issues with mana fixing in this deck because of the land cyclers being able to get the wooded ridgeline. I very, very rarely have issues. We also have Huatli that can fetch manas of both colour as well, so I really don't think the deck needs the fixing. And also having a high number of basics is important for both the land cyclers and the Huatli itself. So I think the mana base is, nothing flashy, but I think it's important to consistently enable Halfling on turn 1 and just ensure that we have enough lands of both colour in the early game as well. So next up we'll have a look at the sideboard, starting off here with 2 copies of Haywire Might. So this is here first of all specifically for the One Ring deck. So our main deck is very, very capable of beating the One Ring because we just go so big on the battlefield. Unless the opponent can find a sweeper, we can just force through a ton of damage. But if the opponent can assemble the One Ring plus Shieldred early and we have a slightly slower start, that is kind of tricky to beat. So having Haywire Might is just an out to that to stop the opponent running away from the game is pretty big as well. And then we've also got 3 copies of Tranquil Throwback, which again doubles up as another way to kill artifacts and enchantments. So against decks that have a lot of artifacts or a very high impact artifacts or enchantments, like against Overcooked deck, for example, I like bringing in the 3 Throwback in addition to Haywire Might as well. But I think Throwback outside of the One Ring decks is more generically powerful because it's very good against aggro as well, because it can gain us life. It also doubles up as additional graveyard hate, and it's a dinosaur itself as well, so it synergizes very well with stuff like Itzquith, Triumphant Chop. We can tutor it up off Huatli if we need to be able to deal with an artifact or enchantment as well. So I think Throwback is slightly better, but I wanted to run a split here because Haywire Might is very big at dealing with the One Ring as well. Then we got 2 copies of Thron, Breaker of Silence, which is very big against the counterspell decks, obviously. Now, obviously, this doesn't work against Reprieve, but if the opponent doesn't have Reprieve, this is a really nice way of just fighting through counterspells. Now, we do have Delighted Halfling, which can give stuff like Doors of Durin and Natalia uncounterable, but we're not always going to have Halfling, and if the opponent has removal, they're going to kill it straight away. So having Thron as just additional top end that we can ramp into, that the opponent just can't stop with conventional blue counterspells, is very big. And there are also just a number of decks that just can't deal with this, right? Especially decks that rely on black removal. They really struggle to deal with this once it's in play as well. So Thron, really solid against both counterspells and decks that rely on a lot of single target removal to be able to beat us. And we've got 4 copies of Triumphant Chomp, which is a really nice dinosaur-specific removal spell. So it is sorcery speed, but early in the game it just deals 2 to anything, which is very powerful, especially against stuff like Delighted Halfling or Crucius. But as you get more dinosaurs into play, or as you get bigger dinosaurs into play, this scale's really big. And being able to deal, 5 or 7 damage for 1 mana to a creature is so big. So against the aggro decks, I really like bringing the 4 Triumphant Chomp, in addition to 3 Tranquil Throwback as, a way to stabilize and gain a bit of life. It means that we have a really solid matchup against stuff like mono red post sideboard as well. So Triumphant Chop, really important against decks that require extra interaction. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've also got 4 copies of Red and Realm Breaker, which is basically here for the control decks for a start. Red and Realm Breaker is really, really difficult for them to deal with efficiently, and it also works incredibly well with Doors of Durin, which brings me on to my second thing, and that is that our main deck is very vulnerable to Sunfall specifically, right? We're very good at building a wide board, but if the opponent has Sunfall, they can just completely get rid of it. And Red and Realm Breaker is a really, really good good way to combat against Sunfall decks, especially with Doors of Durin, because not only does Run and Realm Breaker give our lands, you know, haste and hexproof, which is very good if they're relying on single target removal, but it also gives them haste. So if we do have a Doors of Durin in play and they Sunfall, we can just cast the Run and Realm Breaker, animate one of our lands, which then triggers Doors of Durin to get another creature in play. So Run and Realm Breaker just works so well at shoring up the weaknesses against control decks, but more specifically against decks that are running Sunfall, which is very big. And then obviously we can cast it on turn 2 off Delighted Halfling, which is really big for those, or really difficult for those sorts of decks to beat. So that's the deck overall. It's felt so powerful, and it's also been so much fun to play as well. I've had a blast playing this deck. Definitely let me know in the comments if you've got any questions about this deck at all. Next up, I've got some gameplay. I've just got 5 matches that I was playing on the ladder with this deck so you guys can see it in action. As I said, if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments, and I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, I think we can keep this one. Even though we have tap lands for both turn 1 and 2, I think this is still a keep, right? Because we can go Withered Ridgeline on turn 1, into Cycle Generous Ascent, into Delighted Halfling, which I think is fine. And we've got, you know, 2 Raptors and an Natalia's top end here. So while this isn't the cleanest hand, I think it's definitely still, you know, a keepable one for sure. So going to run out the Ridgeline here. If the opponent does have Dreams of Steel and Oil and takes the Generous Ascent, then that obviously sucks, but I don't think I should mulligan a hand just on the possibility of that, right? We don't even know what deck the opponent's playing yet, so... Now, the one risk of this hand is if we do miss land drops, it's going to be kind of rough. But even then, we still have... Oh, wow, okay. We found the second land straight away, so... Interesting whether we want to go Bramble Familiar, but I think I prefer going Halfling into Cycle the Generous Ascent here, because then we have the guaranteed untapped third land here. So if the Halfling survives, we can just cast the Raptor next turn, which is pretty huge. Okay, so it looks like we're against Sultai here. Not sure what exact build, because there are, obviously, you know, you've got Midrange Sultai, you've got the more combo-based Oracle of the Alpha builds, but getting Hulking Raptor down here is going to be huge, because, I mean, the opponent can go for the Throat It with Ward 2, but they'd have to use their entire turn to do that, because they have to pay 4 mana in order to do all that, so... And untapping here with the Hulking Raptor should be pretty big, right? Wow, especially if we drew the land off the top, which we did. So now we can cast a Atali on turn 4, which is absolutely huge. Even though the opponent did have Shieldred, you know, as long as we get a good Atali hit, I think that should be good. We hit one ring, which obviously isn't great when the opponent has a Shieldred, but hitting a second Atali is just the nuts here, right? We get another go. We get Generous Ascent, wow, and a go for the Throat. So this pretty powerful turn 4 here, not going to lie. But yeah, this just shows, you know, the power of Hulking Raptor. Even if the opponent had a removal spell, it's incredibly awkward for them to stop because of the Ward 2 here. So yeah, I think I'd be very shocked if we end up losing this one now. Yeah, okay, so we definitely high-rolled the opponent there in that one. So against Sultai, I mean, we saw the one ring, so I'm going to bring in a couple of Haywire Mites. I'm not really sure we want much else, and I think I'm just going to trim... probably a couple Bramble Familiars here, because I imagine they are not only an interactive deck in general, but they're probably going to bring in more interaction post-sideboard, so the mana dorks become a little bit less important, or, well, it's still important to have a high density of them, or our top-end stuff is really awkward to draw, but, you know, especially post-sideboard where the game slows down a little bit, I think you can trim them because we have so many other ways to dig for lands, right? We have the land cyclers that can help us find them. We also have Huatli, which is really solid in this matchup, not only ensuring that we keep hitting land drops, but also threatening to transform. And Huatli in particular is really important as a 4-of here because, you know, in these interactive matchups, your mana dorks surviving doesn't happen as often because they have, you know, a lot of stuff like cut down, go for the throat to cut you off your mana dorks. So having additional ways to keep hitting land drops in this matchup is very big, because oftentimes it does come down to top decking. So I'm not thrilled about mulliganing against the discard deck, but, you know, we can't keep a one-lander. You know, I think it's more important to have a high density of lands, even if you do mull in these sorts of matchups. And then Itzquint is reasonable, especially with Hulking Raptor, because we can use it to take out Shieldred. But as I mentioned, I think hitting your land drops is very important here, especially when the mana dorks aren't likely to die. Aren't likely to survive, I mean. And this hand is still pretty good, right? We can go Familiar on 2, into potentially Raptor on 3, into Doors on 4 if everything goes correctly, but yikes. Okay, Glisser on turn 2 is very rough for us, especially when we're on the draw. Definitely going to cycle the Generous Ascent here. But yeah, that's very bad for us because, you know, one weakness of this particular list is that outside of the Carnosaur, and I guess the Itzquint as well, we don't have good early removal compared to the opposing black decks, which means if they can get down a snowboardy threat like a Glister early in the game, they're going to start pulling ahead, and then they're going to be able to draw removal, which will slow our game plan down. So this is not a good start for us at all, right? Glister immediately drawing them cards this early on is going to be tricky to beat. So they do miss a land drop, which I guess is a good sign for us, but in a way that's also not a good sign because I don't think we can afford to block the Glister here, and it means their hand is just full of gas. So they'll have 2 more draw steps to find a land, and that just means that the rest of their hand is just all, you know, non-land good stuff. And I assume we're against a mid-range deck from what we've seen so far. Obviously not seen Oracle of the Alpha. And honestly, I'm not particularly high on the Oracle deck, so I wouldn't be surprised if they are just on a mid-range build. So I think I'm going to go for the Hulking Raptor here. I think even though we are pretty far behind, we need to go for the highest upside play. And the opponent is missing land drops as well, right? They didn't hit the 3rd land here, so I think there's a reasonable chance the Raptor survives here, in which case we can get the doors down next turn and then potentially attack. Okay, they do have to go for the throat, so Raptor does die, and now they've got a lot of pressure, and you know, the one drawback of doors is if you cast it when you're pretty far behind, you have to attack in order to trigger it. I mean, having said that, I still think I'm going to be attacking here if we do get to resolve the doors, because there's always the chance that we can hit an Atali and then develop more onto the board. So I think that's what I'm going to try and do here. I don't think there's anything the opponent could have to kill the Halfling, because their Halfling can only produce colourless mana at this point. So I think we need to hope to hit an Atali into a really good hit to survive here, or at least a Carnosaur. So we're not dead on the crackback, right? So, but I think we in order to stabilize, we need to hope to hit well here. Okay, we hit another door, so just going to have to scoop it up. But I think it was the correct play to bottom 2 there. I think the only way we're winning is if we do hit an Atali or a Carnosaur off the top. So I don't think I'm going to change how we sideboard here, to be honest, though. I think that was just a case of, you know, Glister is very strong against us on turn 2 on the draw because we don't really have good early interaction, and all of our early creatures produce mana, so we don't really want to block. But overall, I do feel like we should have a good shot going into game 3, especially on the play. So even if the opponent does have a turn 2 Glister, we have more time to develop to try and stop that. So this hand is obviously, you know, lacking top end, but, you know, as I said, they're probably going to be running discard spells against us, so we don't really want to be mulliganing too much. And honestly, it's good to keep hands with ramp and not as much payoff. Or it's not good, but it's better to have it this way round than the other way round, because, you know, now any of our top end is good to draw. So here I'm going to cycle the Generosent because we have the Doors of Durin here, which we can resolve and potentially attack with the Haywire Might, right? We can get the doors down immediately. I'm going to play... I guess it doesn't really matter because we can get red mana off the Halfling here. But yeah, going to run out the doors. They can't counter it. You know, they don't have enough mana for... They don't have white mana for a reprieve, so that's definitely going to resolve. And now they kind of have to kill the Haywire Might. Or I guess... Oh, wow. They have Terrace Under. Okay, that's pretty bad. Now I regret cycling the Generosent. I didn't think about Terrace Under there. So now we're in a little bit of trouble, although if we draw any more top end... Okay, perfect. I mean, this is what I mean, right? Keeping hands with ramp and not as much top end is usually fine, because this deck runs so much top end, right? Not only do we have, you know, the doors, the Carnosaur, the Atali, but we also have all of the land cyclers as well, which are also decent to ramp into. So yeah, obviously that was a good draw for us, but we have so much top end that I think we're not unlikely to draw that sort of thing anyway. So this is kind of an interesting spot because we can't really attack here, and the opponent's not really doing anything, so I assume they're just holding open removal to hit the Huatli if we try and transform it, but I kind of don't want to do nothing for my turn, but I also don't want to give them, you know, free use of their mana to kill the Huatli. They got Malcolm. Okay, so I'm going to set stops during the opponent's turn just to bluff some interaction here. You know, bluff Carnosaur, because they know we've got Carnosaur, so it's good to represent some sort of interaction here, I think. So Malcolm is pretty good. That's going to start smoothing their hand out a lot. So we do need to hopefully draw something good off the top. Oh, wow, okay. Bramble Familiar. Again, Bramble Familiar, another card that's very good to draw once we have access to mana here. And I don't imagine they've brought in counter spells. They are running Sultai, so they may have done. Okay, we hit another Carnosaur. That's pretty good. Didn't hit an Atali, which would have been the best. But, you know, Carnosaur is pretty sick here, especially if we hit a Doors of Durin. So we hit another Huatli. I think I'm just going to put that one into my hand here. You know, that's the other nice thing about Discover. You don't have to cast what you hit as opposed to Cascade. Don't think it's worth attacking yet, but if the opponent doesn't develop too much more, I think I might be interested in attacking next turn maybe. We would lose the Dinosaur, but actually I don't know. It's tricky. We'll have to see what they play first. But we can't afford to just keep sitting back. Especially because if that Malcolm hits 4 counters, they can start casting stuff for free. Wow, they cut down the Haywire Might. So I imagine since they didn't cut down the Huatli, that must mean they've got a 1 ring. But if they tap out for the 1 ring here, we can transform the Huatli. Yeah, they do have the 1 ring. Not too surprised, but the auto tapper... Okay, they're just going to activate it now. So we do get to transform the Huatli here, which is pretty big. Maybe I'm supposed to attack with it first, actually. Oh, no, they've got the 1 ring. What am I talking about? So definitely get to transform the Huatli here, which is pretty big. And that is actually very huge, because if they don't have another Terra Sunder, that is going to help us, you know, that's going to tutor us and Tali in the next few turns. We also get to, you know, cast and potentially bounce the Bramble Familiar as well. We could also transform the Huatli again next turn, and then once it hits Chapter 4... even if the opponent does get Shieldreds and other creatures into play, I feel like the double strike and trample from Chapter 4 should hopefully be good enough for us to close the game out. And yeah, if the opponent does tap out here, we get to transform Huatli again, get 2 more 3/3s, get another Atali. Okay, yeah, so they kill the Huatli, which makes sense. They are getting dangerously close to that 4th counter, which I am a bit concerned about, but you know, they are taking damage off the 1 ring every turn. We do have a lot of power in play. And now I think I'm probably quite interested in attacking. Even losing the Carnosaur. Well, again, we'll see what they develop. If they put more creatures into play, then maybe. But, you know, we still get to get in for a lot of damage next turn. We still get to tutor for an Atali the turn after that. And with a 1 ring in play, unless they can find a Shieldred soon, we are putting a lot of pressure on their life total. And they cut down a Halfling. I mean... that just tells me... Oh, okay, they cut down the other one as well. So they're kind of on damage control here, right? They don't want to let us force through extra damage. Interesting. So we get a Paleontologist, which then allows us to potentially cast one of the dinosaurs from the graveyard. Just counting up the mana here. Whether I want to attack first or not. I mean, we could potentially use the Paleontologist to cast a... Carnosaur from the graveyard if they do block it with the Glisser here. So I'm gonna run out the Paleontologist here, see if they've got an answer for it or not. So we can't unfortunately cast the Carnosaur this turn, even if they do block it. I mean, we could by holding back some creatures, but oh wait, what am I doing? No, I don't want to do that. So I'm gonna cast the Hulking Raptor here, and then you know, the opponent only has blue and green mana here, so we don't have to worry about go for the throat. If they had black mana up, I would be slightly hesitant to attack here, because if they go for the throat one of the Carnosaurs and block the other one, that's pretty bad. But even though we're losing a 7/6 to their Glisser here, I think I'm pretty happy to attack with everything, because we are getting in for, what, 13 damage, puts them down to 5, and they're taking another 2 off the 1 ring here. Do they have something that they can cast for blue mana, potentially? Okay, it doesn't look like it. So we do lose a Carnosaur, but we get in for a lot of damage here. So opponent kind of needs Shieldred or another 1 ring at this point to stabilize. You know, the fact that we were able to cast another Hulking Raptor to kind of replace the Carnosaur here is a pretty big deal. Aha, okay, they did have the Fairy Mastermind. They chose not to block with it, which is interesting. So I feel like they kind of have to find a Shieldred here, or they're in real trouble. Because if they activate the 1 ring, they're taking 3 off that during their upkeep. Right, and so they choose to activate, which means they don't have Shieldred in hand, which is pretty big. But now they've drawn 3 more cards, and they get to cast one of them for free off the Malcolm, because it hits 4 counters, which is pretty scary. So they could very well have hit Shieldred and get to cast it for free off the Malcolm, which would be kind of rough. And then they would get to, then they wouldn't be dead to the 1 ring because they can activate it. Wow, they did. They had the Shieldred. So now they're not dead to the 1 ring because they can activate it during the upkeep, but we get to tutor an Atali here, which is a pretty big deal. Wow, okay, they go for the throat, the 7/6, the Carnosaur. So that's a bit annoying, but we do get to, you know, resolve Atali here, which is pretty big game, I think, right? If we hit a go for the throat for the Shieldred, they're dead. Although they do have mana open for the Plaza of Heroes, so They can protect the Shieldred this turn. Wow, we do hit Itzquinth, which is another way that we can kill the Shieldred. But again, they've got Plaza up, so they can defend themselves from that. So definitely going to be tutoring up the Atali here. And then just trying to think about the order that we want to do this in. I think it probably makes more sense to go for Atali first, just to see what we hit. And then I think I'm probably going to use Itzquinth to force the Plaza activation. I mean, it depends what we hit. If we hit a piece of removal from their deck, then we can force them to crack the Plaza beforehand and then potentially save the Itzquinth for next turn. Okay, so Halfling from their deck is obviously pretty bad, but Dinosaur from ours is sick. Now we get Hulking Raptor down. Okay, now we have a very big board presence going into Chapter 4 of our saga. So I think I'm just going to force them to crack the Plaza here. It gets another Dinosaur in play going into next turn. And it, cuts them off mana as well, right? They have to sack a land in order to protect the Shieldred here. So I'm going to tap the Paleontologist, and I think I'm going to target the Hulking Raptor here because they would need to tap out entirely if they have something like a Go for the Throat in order to fizzle this. So they're obviously going to use the Plaza if they don't have a Go for the Throat here. Yeah, so they activate the Plaza, and then I'm honestly not sure it's worth attacking here because we would lose 2 creatures regardless, right? We would lose one to the Shieldred, one to the Glisser without killing any of their creatures. But they are at 3. Hold on, let me work this out. So they block the Raptor, they block the 3/3, and then they can just block the other 2 creatures if they wanted to as well. Doesn't seem worth it, really. If we could force through lethal here, it would obviously definitely be worth it, but I think with so many Dinosaurs in play, it's just worth waiting a turn here, and then all of our Dinosaurs get double strike and trample next turn. I mean, the risk with that is that they could use, if they can find another Terrace Thunder, they can obviously get rid of our Saga here. I'm also debating whether it's worth casting Bramble Familiar here or not, just to get another creature in play, because I think the thing I'm scared about here is they're definitely going to upkeep activate the One Ring. They could obviously find another One Ring as well, which would be a bit sketchy. So getting an extra creature in play here does seem pretty appealing, and I'm not too concerned about them killing me this turn. And I'm going to hold on to the Wooded Ridgeline, first of all as a bluff, but second of all as a card that we can potentially discard to the Bramble Familiar next turn. We can use it to fetch quest into potentially another Atali if they kill ours, right? If they use Go for the Throat on Atali here, I guess we could also recast it off the Paleontologist, so maybe it was better to just play out the Wooded Ridgeline there, but... So, opponent goes up to 9, which is a bit of a concern, but if they can't find the One Ring, or, okay, they did find a Terra Sunder, so, that makes things a little bit more difficult, and they go for the Throat the Atali here, so... I feel like we should still have enough pressure in play here though, right? I mean, it depends. They can also gain 2 off the Malcolm trigger here, right? They can attack with Malcolm, draw a card, discard a card, gain 2 off the Shieldred, puts them up to 11. So this is definitely a close game. It's been an interesting one. And to be honest, I think them finding another One Ring would probably be worse than Terra Sunder, so that wasn't the absolute worst case scenario from our point of view. See what we draw for turn here. Interesting, we draw Generous Sense, so we get a ton of mana here. So I think I'm just going to use the Paleontologist. So yeah, I think it was probably correct to run out the Wooded Ridgeline last turn, not 100% sure. And then, I think we'll just go for the Atali here, see what we hit. And then we still have some mana spare as well. So this just shows, how much mana the Hulking Raptors can churn out. Oh, we hit an Itzquinth. Okay, I mean, they can still activate the Plaza here, right? But they would have to tap the Halfling in order to do so. Which would obviously mean they have one less blocker here. And we can target the Atali here as well. I guess maybe it's better to target the Glisser here, but I feel like Shieldred is definitely the more impactful of the creatures. So yeah, taps them out the Halfling, which means they have one less blocker here. And then, let me just calculate here. So they're going to block the Carnosaur with the Glisser. They can block 3 of our other creatures here, so that's 5. Block there. So I think this should still be lethal. Let me just double check. 2, 3. Man, I need to play more limited. My combat maths is not great. It takes me a while. But yeah, I think we should be good here, right? They block the Carnosaur with the Glisters to stop the trample damage. They block the 2 Raptors and a 3/3, right? And then we still get in for 5, 7, 9, 10, right? Like, they have to block with the Malcolm here, right? Unless I've not counted right. Opponent's definitely in the tank about it. I mean, either way, they have to block the Carnosaur with the Glister, have to block the two Raptors here. And yeah, they have to block the 3/3 as well, surely. So unfortunately, we don't get any of the trample damage, but we should be able to get through for lethal with the rest. So managed to beat Shielded One Ring, which is, no small feat. Okay, so we're going second here. And I don't think we can keep this hand because we've got nothing between Itzquinth and Atali, right? We need some amount of, mid-game going on here. This, again, don't have any ramp here, but I think on a 6 we have to keep this one. I really don't want to go down to 5. And as long as the opponent doesn't have a crazy fast start here, this hand is definitely capable of competing, right? As long as we can hit the 3rd land, we can go Huatli, find another land, and then, we've got Carnosaur's interaction, and then we can hopefully bridge the gap to get doors down and start snowballing the game that way as well. Okay, so it looks like we're against Mardu, and they do have Hopeless Nightmare, so I'm very glad I didn't go any lower than a 6, because these sorts of Mardu decks with, Peddler and Hopeless Nightmare can really pick apart your hand and punish you for mulliganing too often. And we did find the Oliphant, so now we have the 3rd land. We don't have anything to play on turn 2, so I'm just going to take this opportunity to get the Ridgeline out of the deck, just so we don't draw it later. We kind of want to see untapped lands from here on out if we can. Now we have the 3rd land, we can go Huatli next turn. And I feel pretty good about this spot. I am a little bit worried about, Crucius or Overseer, but we do have the Carnosaur to deal with them immediately. So even in that spot, I think we're all right. And if the opponent doesn't have to play anything proactively, we can just run out Huatli here, get an extra land, and hopefully, get towards this Doors of Durin. So opponent passes here. I imagine they've got a reprieve, but, might as well beat it out now, right? I'm not going to not use my mana efficiently just because we think they might have reprieve. They do have the reprieve, but I'd rather they reprieve the Huatli here than, save that reprieve for a Doors of Durin or something like that. So happy to buy that out of the way. And then we'll see what they've got here. I guess there was some consideration to holding open the Carnosaur in case they played Crucius, right? Being able to kill Crucius before it gets the first trigger is pretty big. But again, I'd rather just bait out the reprieve there. They could have also just had go for the throat instead, in which case Huatli is definitely the better play. Okay, they do have the Overseer here, so I think there is definitely a good argument to just going for the Carnosaur here, I think. Huatli does get a creature in play and does get us the 5th land to go for Doors of Durin next turn. But I really don't want to give the opponent an extra card here, right? If we don't kill this Dual Mind Overseer, it's really going to start snowballing the game. And next time we've still got reasonable play. Even though we don't get the Doors of Durin down, we can go Huatli, get a land into Paleontologist, and then we have 2 creatures in play, so even if the opponent has a single target removal, we can still get a Doors trigger off the 2nd creature that we have in play. So getting 2 creatures into play also makes us less vulnerable to stuff like Porcine Portent and go for the throat, which I think is pretty big, so definitely like the slow start from the opponent. Wow, they just fire at the Restless Fortress. Okay, I'm very, very happy to see that. So that tells me they must just have interaction in their hands, and they must also not have reprieve for them to do that. So again, just going to go for that line here. Go Huatli. I think we've got enough red lands already, right? You only really need 2 red lands in this deck so that you can, cast Atali and Carnosaur and transform Huatli. So just going to get more green mana here. And now I feel pretty good about this spot because I feel like if they had reprieve, they probably wouldn't have attacked with the Fortress. So I think we'll be pretty free to cast the Doors of Durin. And for them to, effectively counteract that, they would need 2 removal spells here. So they Dollmaker and exile the Hopeless Nightmare. So I think I'm just going to pitch the land here. Typically, I'm not a big fan of discarding lands against these sorts of decks because you want to be able to cast everything you draw off the top. And in this deck, the curve goes all the way up to 7. But with Huatli in our hand, that can fetch us another land anyway. And I'm obviously not going to be discarding the doors in this spot either. So opponent's mousing over my creature. I don't know if they're considering using a removal spell during the main phase here. I guess they could still technically have 2 removal spells here if they have Torch the Tower into Go for the Throat. Aha, okay, there is Torch the Tower on Huatli. I'm surprised they didn't save that to use at instant speed though, because they can fizzle us transforming Huatli if we did go for that, but maybe they think it's best to just do it proactively and they don't have to worry about it. Either way, I'm just going to jam the doors here. Okay, they don't have anything, so we get a doors trigger here, which is huge. So we get to attack. Okay, I'm going to bottom the Paleontologist, but we get an Oliphant on top, so that's huge. You know, get in for a decent amount of damage here. And we know the opponent doesn't have Go for the Throat because Arena's giving away priority here, so you know, for them to stop us getting another trigger next turn, they would need, you know, Legions to Ashes or a Porcine Portent here. Portent would be kind of rough because they can obviously kill the Oliphant and then kill the doors before we get our next trigger, but if they don't have a removal here, they're going to be in big trouble. Okay, so they got 7 Dwarves. Yeah, they basically need to kill this Oliphant, or I think we're just going to snowball too much advantage here. You know, this particular build of the deck basically never whiffs on Doors of Durin. It's very, very unlikely. Obviously, we have some lower impact cards, but one of the most powerful things about the Doors is that, you know, as long as you have a creature in play, you can still trigger it every single turn, right? Even if that creature isn't super high impact. So opponent does have 2 7 Dwarves, so they can obviously double block the Oliphant here. Or if they have a third one, they can obviously just trade with it in combat. Okay, so opponent passes back. I think I'm just going to go straight to combat to see if they have a removal spell here. Okay, they don't. That's huge. So now we get, you know, we get a Doors of Durin trigger. Unfortunately, Oliphant needs to target on resolution. Oh, wow, okay. Trumpeting Carnosaur, that's one of the best hits out of the deck. So that's huge. So we get Carnosaur in. That's 13 trample damage. And, oh wow, and we hit an its Squith as well. So I'm pretty sure if the opponent had removal, they would have used it already on the Oliphant before we attacked. So I'm pretty sure we just get to kill one of their 7 Dwarves for free. And now, at this point, unless they have Sunfall, I think we're probably just going to win this one now, right? They only have a 2/2/7 Dwarves. We're getting in for 13 here, and then we can trigger Doors again the following turn. And then, you know, main phase 2... I don't want to overcommit to the board because I think the way we do lose here is if the opponent does have Sunfall, but I'm still going to run out the Huatli here. You know, we get that 6th land, so even if the opponent does have Sunfall, we can just cast Generous Scent as a follow-up, which is pretty reasonable. And then I'm going to run out the Halfling here. You know, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. You know, these Mardu decks typically don't main deck the Sunfall, and like I said, even if they do have a sweeper, we can just run out the Generous Scent next turn anyway, which is going to be tricky for them to deal with. You know, we've seen they haven't got a single target removal here. Yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So this matchup does feel pretty good because we have such good, you know, snowbally cards. Typically the Mardu deck gets its advantage off its early discard, but we have so many good top decks. So I think the important thing here is that we just keep hitting land drops every turn so that we can just cast what we draw off the top, really. You know, our late game is, or we generally just go way over the top of them, so... But yeah, overall this matchup has felt pretty decent. You know, a lot of their discard outside of Peddler isn't targeted. You know, Hopeless Nightmare can strip away your hand, but as long as you're not greedy, you know, typically you want to avoid discarding lands, because as I mentioned, being able to cast what you draw off the top is the way you win this matchup, and so you typically want to prioritize just discarding your non-lands, keeping the land drops going every single turn, and then, you know, you're going to draw your Doors of Durin, you're going to draw your Hulking Raptors, which are difficult for them to deal with efficiently, because they don't typically run Edicts, right? So... you know, the only way for them to deal with Rapture in the early game is something like Go for the Throat when they have 4 mana. You know, you're going to draw your Carnosaurs and your Land Cyclers. So, yeah, I generally feel this matchup is pretty decent. Obviously, Reprieve can be a bit of a blowout. That's the main card you need to keep an eye on, especially when you're, you know, trying to cast stuff like Doors of Durin or Atali or Carnosaur. But, yeah, overall, this has definitely felt a pretty good matchup because you have so much, you know, so many high-impact late-game cards. So... again, because they have a lot of discard, I really want to keep any passable 7. We obviously don't have a ton of top end here, but the really nice thing about both Huatli and Bramble Familiar is they're both early game cards that also count as top end, right? Huatli in particular is really good in this matchup because, like I said, you just want to keep the land drops going every single turn, which Huatli really helps with. And then if the opponent ever taps out, transforming Huatli is just a way to completely snowball the game in your favor. You get 2/3/3s immediately, and you get to tutor your Atali as well, which is really difficult for them to stop unless they have Reprieve. Wow, okay, Doors is great off the top, so definitely get down Halfling on turn 1 here. If it survives, getting Whatley down on turn 2 is going to be pretty big. The way I see this hand falling apart is if they kill the Halfling here and we don't keep drawing lands. Okay, opponent does have Dreams of Steel and Oil, so interesting to see what they take here. Personally, I would be most scared of them taking Whatley, but I can completely see why they would take the Doors here, you know, especially after losing to it last game. But yeah, Whatley is going to be very big if we can get it down on turn 2 here. Hopefully they don't have Torch the Tower. Because like I said, I think the way we lose this is if we just don't draw lands and the opponent just keeps killing our mana dorks. If they just have a hand full of removal, or, you know, they get Crucius down and you know, okay, they do have Torch the Tower. That's pretty rough. So, going to get down the Paleontologist here. And again, you know, like I said, if they have a bunch of removal here, this is going to be rough to play through. But again, if we can draw our third land, I think Whatley really opens this hand up quite a lot. So, hopefully the Paleontologist lives here, but I'm not holding my breath. Yeah, they got another Torch the Tower, so hopefully we find another land here. Okay, we don't. So this is what I was kind of worried about, right? The issue with Mana Dorks against these interactive decks is it does slow down your ability to develop quite a lot, but the opponent just using all their mana on interaction also means they're not really developing themselves. Now, I would be concerned if they went Crucius into a removal spell here, because then they are sort of developing a little bit more, but I still feel pretty good about this spot, right? As long as we can find that third land, Whatley finds us the fourth land, and then, you know, we can start casting Bramble Familiar as creatures and then get towards Fetch Quest. Oh, interesting. They're running 3 Blind Mice. Okay, so that would have been very useful information in sideboarding, because okay, we do find the third land, and the Paleontologist survives. So I think rather than going for Whatley here, I'm actually just going to take this opportunity to develop more into 2 Bramble Familiars, because then if we can find another land, I don't think they had a removal spell. They probably would have cast it there. We can then cast Fetch Quest, which is a pretty big deal. Okay, they didn't have the Dull Maker here, which is pretty big, because without bringing in the any artifact or enchantment removal, we don't have any way to beat the 3 Blind Mice Leap. Now, having said that, we can go over the top of it pretty efficiently. Okay, we did find an Atali off the Fetch Quest, which is huge. And pretty good hits there, right? We got Hulking Raptor. 3 Blind Mice isn't that big here, but Hulking Raptor is pretty nice when we can both transform Atali and potentially transform the Whatley here as well. But yeah, no Dull Maker from the opponent is pretty big there. Again, they could have been sandbagging it because they do have another turn to potentially flip it. But now with an Atali in play, I feel like we could potentially race the 3 Blind Mice Leap anyway. You know, typically that's how you beat it game 1. You just race, commit to the board as quickly as possible, and you can often just trample through all their 1/1 mouse tokens. Post sideboard, when it's, you know, they're going to have better interaction against you, it does become a little bit tricky because the games tend to slow down a little bit. So typically if the opponent is on Blind Mice Dull Maker combo, I will bring in the Frillbacks usually. You know, sometimes the Haywire Mites in addition if they're running a lot of artifacts and enchantments, like if they're running Palantir, One Ring, or, you know, the White Virtue, I'll also consider bringing both in. But, you know, in this sort of situation, from what we've seen of the opponent's deck, if this does go to a game 3, I think I'm just bringing in the Frillbacks here. So to make use of the mana I'm off the Raptor, I'm definitely going to run out the Whatley here. And then I think I'm going to try and transform the Whatley, because if they use their removal spell on the Whatley instead of the Atali, I'm really happy about that. And if they don't kill the Whatley in response here, we get to get the enchantment, which is a really solid way of fighting through whatever they can find here, to be honest. So it looks like they're considering, yeah, they do use the Portent here, but I'm actually quite happy for them to use the Portent on the Whatley instead of the Atali here. Because now we get to force through some damage. We can also potentially transform the Atali pretty soon as well, right? Okay, they blocked the Hulking Raptor, so we don't get the mana, so unlikely that we're going to be able to transform the Atali unless we use like all of our mana on it. And then I could play the Bramble Familiar, but I think I'm more interested in using the Paleontologist here, right? We can use the Paleontologist to exile one of the dinosaurs from our graveyard and recast it next turn, which seems pretty nice. 3 Blind Mice disappears, which means we no longer have to worry about the Dull Maker, which is pretty huge. So yeah, unless the opponent has Sunfall, which they very well, you know, I think if they have Sunfall in their 75, they're definitely going to have it in this matchup, but they haven't found their 5th land drop yet, which is, you know, pretty big for us. And we are getting close to winning, right? Opponent's at 13, and we already have a ton of power in play here, so opponent leads on 7 Dwarves. I'm kind of surprised they didn't lead on the Crucius unless they already have a land in hand here. I would feel like Crucius trying to tutor towards Sunfall is the way that they stabilize here. And that would do a pretty good job, right? If they, you know, blocked to stay alive, use the Crucius to find a Sunfall, then we're pretty much out of gas. We still have the Bramble Familiar in exile, but they would have the incubation tokens. So, okay, they did have the land though, so they can still cast Crucius here. So I think that is the opponent's one out, right? If they can go Crucius and then try and find a Sunfall here, but you know that's going to be tricky to do. They haven't got very long to be able to do that, right? Unless they happen to have a Portent in hand, they can discard Name Ambitious. Okay, they have another 7 Dwarves and they do Name Ambitious, but we do get to, you know, exile Carnosaur with the Paleontologist here to cast that. Oh, and we found an Itzsquith, so we can use that as additional removal here, which does potentially force through additional damage. I think I'm just going to go for that, right? The Carnosaur, as long as they don't kill the Paleontologist, we still get to cast the Carnosaur next turn. So we can use the Itzsquith to kill the Jawmine Overseer, and now we can just attack with everything, I think. Right, you know, especially because Crucius only has 1 toughness, they can't really effectively block very well at all here, right? They have to let the 7 through. They can block the, you know, 2 of our 2 power creatures, and then we're still getting in for lethal here regardless of how they block, unless they happen to have Torch the Tower. Although, yeah, wait, how would Torch the Tower change things? Okay, it doesn't look like I have it anyway, so we got there, nice. Okay, so we're going first here. And yeah, this hand looks great to me, right? We can cycle the Elephant on turn 1. We got Paleontologist to ramp into the Doors of Durin. Also got Itzsquith as additional early interaction, which is pretty nice. So knowing when to cycle the land cyclist can be a little bit tricky, but I think, you know, generally it's pretty good to just do it early on, to just keep the land drops flowing, because we have so many good expensive cards, and then as you get more towards, you know, your 6 or 7 mana, you can consider holding on to them a little bit more. So opponent does have Duress for the Doors of Durin, which does take away our top end, but I'm still going to cycle the Elephant here. I think, you know, I can see myself curving out the next few turns, so I really don't want to take a turn off curving out to use the land cycler here if possible, right? So next turn, if the opponent plays a creature here, we can potentially use Itzsquith to kill it. And, you know, we've got Paleontologist that we can cast as well. Depending on what we draw for the next turn, I am considering holding on to this Generoscent as something to ramp into. Okay, so we found the Carnosaur. So now we've got more top end. I think I'm just going to cast the Paleontologist here. And probably will cycle the Generoscent, I think. Because, you know, we really want to be able to hard cast the Carnosaur. You know, Carnosaur is generally much more high impact than Generoscent when you can cast it. Okay, opponent does have Go for the Throat, so I'm definitely going to be cycling here, because now, you know, they've cut off one of our mana sources, so we want to keep the lands flowing here for sure. So we don't need to worry about getting, you know, a red source here, because we've already got 2 red sources. You don't typically need more than 2 reds. So just going to get a forest here, and then, you know, it is going to be a little bit sketchy if the opponent has another removal spell for the Paleontologist, because then, you know, we're 2 more land drops away from casting the Carnosaur, but even then we can use the Carnosaur as a removal spell, and, you know, as long as we can keep drawing lands, we can cast whatever we draw off the top, which is pretty nice. Interesting, so we find another Generoscent here. So, just debating whether I want to run out the Itzsquith now or not. It looks like the opponent might be on a control deck rather than a creature deck. So there is definitely some consideration to running out the Itzsquith, but without knowing exactly what the opponent's on here, I think I'm just going to play it a little bit slower here. And I am going to get the Wooded Ridgeline, which does mean that we can't use Carnosaur this turn, but from what the opponent's played so far, they haven't played any creatures, so I think I'm alright doing that, getting the Carnosaur out the deck. Oh, wow, okay, so opponent is running creatures. It looks like they're kind of on a tempo shell here. Potentially a Fairies deck with Halophologist. So now I kind of regret not holding open the mana for a potential Carnosaur here, but I still think with this hand I'm much more interested in casting the Carnosaur than using it as a cycling, you know, as removal. So still not too unhappy with that. So they can potentially go Halophorager into Duress here. But we've only got 1 unknown card. Yeah, so opponent goes for Shielded Edict. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the Paleontologist to exile the Go for the Throat, which does actually matter while they have Halophorager in hand, right? That's the main card I'm worried about them flashing back with the Forager. Okay, Raptor's a nice draw here, but they could very well have Spell Stutter, which would be kind of rough, but I'm still going to jam it, right? We don't really have another good option here. And I'm kind of glad that I held on to this Itzsquith now that we know that they are playing creatures, because Itzsquith can kill a lot of the smaller fairies in this deck. Yeah, I think we're still in a reasonable spot here, right? As long as we can get to cast this Carnosaur, that's going to be really big. Okay, we draw a Bramble Familiar, so I think I'm just going to run that out as a creature so that we potentially have access to 6 mana going into next turn. Obviously, we are weak to Spell Stutter on the Carnosaur here, but I don't think we can, afford to really play around it, and I can't imagine they've got too many counter spells in their main deck. Could be wrong about that. They could also be running Saruman's Trickery potentially as well, but the quality of counter spells... Oh, I guess there's also the new Supreme Will card, but with our current hand, I think our route to victory is just... get to Carnosaur, cast it, hope they don't have a counter spell. Because if we can resolve Carnosaur, I think that could potentially just be good enough for us to close the game out. Wow, especially if they tap out here, this is huge for us. Because if we draw an untapped land, we get to guaranteed resolve the Carnosaur here. And I could very well see them flashing back a removal spell to kill the Familiar here. And their deck does seem, tempo decks typically don't go very big. The only card that really goes over the top in these sorts of blue-black decks that I've seen is Rusko. And so if we can resolve the Carnosaur, I definitely think we can start pressuring and closing this game out. So drawing an untapped land here would be absolutely huge. So obviously really hope to do that. Even if we don't, we've still got Isquinth to kill the Halo Forager. Oh wow, we do. Found an untapped land, that's huge. So now we get to resolve the Carnosaur. Hopefully we get a good hit here. Wow, into Hulking Raptor, that's really solid. So now we have a lot of pressure in play. So, we're still only at 19. Opponent doesn't really have that much going on here. They could obviously be holding on to removal spells, but Hulking Raptor having Ward 2 does tax their ability to interact, and I very much doubt they're running a sweeper here either, so that was a pretty huge hit. We also have Isquinth to be able to take out their blockers next turn as well. Wow, they're still attacking with the Halo Forager. That's brave, but also kind of concerning. Makes me think they probably do have removal spells here if they're willing to attack. Let's see what they got. They could obviously just have like 2 Go for the Throats or something, which should obviously be pretty good. But even then, we still have Isquith. Wow, Atali off the top, that's pretty sick. That's the advantage of playing these ramp decks. I mean, again, opponent could have Spell Stutter here. They have been kind of slow to develop, so I imagine they have a decent amount of interaction. But if they do have to tap out for a counter spell here, that does make it difficult for them to then take out both our creatures because of the Ward 2. Wow, it resolves. Okay, sick. So hitting a Halfling obviously isn't that great, but getting a Go for the Throat to take out their Halo Forager puts us so far ahead on board here. So, this is the thing against these tempo decks. If they don't have a counter spell for your top end stuff, you just completely dominate them on the board. It looks like opponent's thinking about something here. They might have a way to bounce the Halo Forager to reuse it potentially. Maybe Paths of Tuamvel will be pretty good here because, although, bouncing my Atali to reuse it obviously isn't that great. I guess they could also use it on Hulking Raptor though, which cuts us off the mana and makes it slightly more expensive to recast. But we've still got 2 7 power tramplers in play. Yeah, they do have Paths of Tuamvel. So that's not too bad at all though, right? They have to pay Ward 2 here, right? They could potentially have a Go for the Throat as well, but we still get to keep 1 7 power Trampler in play, and it doesn't look like the opponent has anything else, because Arena's giving away priority, so yeah. This is the thing, for these tempo decks to work, they need to have the right interaction at the right points, and I think it's going to be really hard for them to recover from this point. They can obviously use the Halo Forager to get back a Go for the Throat from their graveyard, but even then, like I said, we've already got another 7 power Trampler in play. We can just recast the Hulking Raptor at this point as well. So I feel pretty good about this spot. So yeah, they take out the Atali, which makes sense. See if they got anything else. So yeah, even if they found a removal spell for the Carnosaur, I still think we're in a pretty sweet spot here. Okay, we draw Oliphant. Interesting. So I think I'm just going to attack first here. And there is definitely a consideration to maybe holding back the Halfling to potentially play around Spell Stutter on the Hulking Raptor here. But I guess they've already got a Fairy in play, so what I'm going to do here is just jam the Oliphant, right? They would have had to draw a counterspell in the past couple turns to counter this. Even if they do have a counterspell, we already have a ton of pressure in play already, so I don't think it's too much of an issue. And now we have Raptor and Isquinth. Yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So these tempo decks can be tricky to sideboard against sometimes, depending on what they run. I think I'm just interested in bringing in Toothron over Atali against this particular configuration, though. Sometimes you maybe want to bring in the Chomps. Sometimes you maybe want to bring in the Frillbacks if they're running Rusko and the One Ring or Palantir to take out like the Midnight Clocks and other artifacts from Charmers, as well as, just the 3 life gain is pretty big. And it's also, particularly against this build that has Halo Forager, the additional graveyard hate could be nice, but considering Halo Forager is the only card that Frillback is specifically good against, I don't really think it's worth it. And I think the rest of our deck is pretty well set up here anyway, right? We've already got Halfling to give our other stuff uncounterable. We saw there how far ahead we get if the opponent doesn't happen to have a counter spell. And we're bringing in some Thruns over Atali. So the reason I cut Atali there is it's obviously just the most clunky card to play into counter spells. Even though we can give it uncounterable off the halfling, we're not always going to be able to set that up. And I imagine they're probably going to be bringing in a lot of cut downs and other cheap removal against us. Now they've seen that we've got a lot of mana dorks. So this hand looks great, right? We've got halfling on 1 into Huatli. Obviously we don't have too much top end, but we've got time to draw into that. I think in these sorts of matchups, it's more important to just have good early game stuff. So here, because of the halfling, we can give Huatli uncounterable, which is pretty big, right? Getting Huatli into play is a big deal because if the opponent ever taps out, we can transform it, and transforming it in this matchup is really big. Because it's just very difficult for blue-black to deal with enchantments, or it's basically impossible for them to answer it. And then we get to tutor Atali, we get a really big boost off Chapter 4 as well. So just going to jam the Raptor here. I think there's a good chance they've got a counterspell for it, but we've already got Huatli in play, which is pretty nice. And we've still got Generous Scent in hand as another top-end play if they don't have a counterspell. Okay, they do have the Spell Stutter, but I think that's still fine, right? You know, makes them... If they have something like Sauron's Ransom, it means they can't use their mana proactively. And yeah, still feel pretty good about this spot. They obviously do have a 3-power creature in play, but we can race that. We've got its Squinth in hand. If they do tap out for anything, we can transform the Huatli, like I said. Oh, wow, okay, that's a nice draw. So, because of Halfling, we can give the Doors of Durin uncounterable. Now, they can obviously kill the Huatli before we get to attack, but that's not really too much of an issue going into the next few turns, because even if they have a kill spell for the Halfling as well, we have 2 its Squints in hand, and the ability, well, the fact they've got haste means that we can immediately trigger the Doors of Durin. So they did have go for the throat for our Huatli, but its Squint in hand should mean that unless they have 2 removal spells, we get to trigger the Doors next turn, which, you know, hopefully should be good enough to win. Again, blue-black has no ways of dealing with artifacts once they're in play, as far as I'm aware, so... I guess they do have the bounce spells, so they could have the Thalangard, the 4-drop. I can't remember exactly what it's called. So if they do have that, that's going to be a little bit rough, because then we have to, you know, recast the Doors of Durin, and if they have a removal spell for the Halfling, we can't give it uncounterable anymore, but they have to have it exactly now, or I think we're just going to snowball the game too quickly. Again, if they only have 1 piece of creature removal, we have 2 creatures in play that can trigger the Doors, so... Oh, they do have the Throne Guard, that was it. Talion's Throne Guard, so that is a little bit annoying. They do get to bounce the Doors, which is a pretty good tempo play, and we're already down to 14, so... I am a little bit worried about that. I think, you know, we're definitely going to attack with the Squint. I don't think it's worth attacking with the Halfling, because... You know, if they are sandbagging a counter spell, I think it's very important to be able to give our Doors uncounterable next turn. But I'm definitely going to run out the Paleontologist here so that when we do use the Halfling to pay for the mana for Doors so it can't be countered, we then still have 2 creatures in play to trigger the Doors. But yeah, I am a little bit worried about getting outraced here potentially. If they have another Throne Guard, it's going to get a bit dicey, right? We're already on a 2-turn clock here, so yeah, we'll have to see how this one plays out. Another creature. Thankfully, it's a Sleep Cursed Fairy, so that's not going to be attacking for a little while at least. Definitely some consideration to cycling the Generous Ent here, but I want to keep it as another top-end threat, particularly because it has reach here, right? If we can resolve an Ent on defense here, not only does it gain us 3 life, but it also blocks all of their creatures, which is pretty huge. Wow, okay, we get to attack. That's pretty big. So I'm not going to attack with the Paleontologist here because we can potentially use it to, you know, exile something from the graveyard to recast. And they can also obviously block with the Sleep Cursed Fairy here, so I don't want to throw that away. We hit Carnosaur, which is obviously great. Carnosaur into Bramble Familiar unfortunately doesn't work the same way that Invasion does, right? We can't cast the Fetch Quest side, but we still get a lot of power in play here, so... Still feel pretty good about this spot. And I also don't feel like it's worth attacking with the Paleontologist here because it doesn't really change our clock that much as long as we hit something impactful off the Doors, which we did. Okay, so they are running Confounding Riddle, like the better Supreme Will. But I still feel like we should be good here, right? It's going to come down to their top decks. The other thing with keeping Paleontologist back here is that it also blocks Mirrex tokens, which is definitely a consideration. Now, it doesn't really represent lethal because I guess they could have... Oh no, they don't have enough mana to untap the Cursed Fairy and make a Mirrex token, but I still think it's worth keeping it back just to potentially prevent damage. And now, even though I was thinking about keeping Generous Scent back as a blocker, now that we've got a Carnosaur in play, I think I'm just going to cycle for a land and get an Itzquinth in play just to get another attacker in play, right? I don't think the opponent can kill us next turn unless they get a lucky top deck off the top. So getting another creature in play hopefully means that we can close the game out next turn. Okay, them not attacking with everything is a very good sign here, right? Again, there's maybe an argument to holding on to the Ent, but I feel like that's really defensive. Again, there's an argument to holding on to the Itzquinth, but I feel, again, that's too defensive, really. And the main reason I wanted to get Itzquinth down there is just in case they have another counterspell. Okay, we drew a land off the top, which obviously isn't the best. We can use the Paleontologist to recast an Itzquinth from the graveyard anyway, which I think I'm going to do here because it just takes out a blocker. The issue with doing this is if they drew a Throne Guard off the top. But if they drew a Throne Guard off the top, that, they can just do it as we progress to combat anyway. And I don't, they'd bounce it to cut off the Doors of Durin anyway. And we wouldn't get another opportunity to use it again until next turn anyway. So I don't think it really matters. So here, I think I'm going to keep the one with the Finality counter on it so we still have access to the other one in the graveyard if we want to loop it again next turn. Definitely going to target the Itzquinth in case they drew a removal spell for the Carnosaur here. So this just takes out another blocker. So hopefully just force 3 more damage. Again, they can untap the Sleep Curse Fairy to block here. So hopefully this will be lethal. I mean, if we get another good hit off doors here, I think we should be good. Looks like opponents think about something. Did they find another Throne Guard off the top? That would be pretty rough if they did. But I don't think we can really do anything about that anyway, right? We could have obviously... Oh, wow, they did. Okay, that's a pretty good draw. I think that's their 1 out there. Damn. Okay, that's annoying. But again, I don't think, not playing Itzquinth would allow us to recast the Doors main phase 2, but I don't think it would really change anything, right? Because we wouldn't be able to use it until next turn and again anyway. So they do have to spend mana to untap the Sleep Curse Fairy, and they do lose Throne Guard here. We put them down to 1. And then they have exact lethal, so that kind of sucks. They had a 1-outer, and this sequence puts them to 1, and then exactly kills me, so that's a little bit frustrating. I don't feel we could have really played around that any better. Maybe we could have attacked with Paleontologist earlier, but then maybe that was a slight misplay, not attacking with the Paleontologist, but I didn't know that I was going to hit the Carnosaur off the Doors of Durin, so I still feel, with the information that I had at that time, it was probably the correct play because, as I mentioned, the other thing I was worried about was them just making a Mirrex token, then untapping the Sleep Curse Fairy and attacking. That keeps us blocked, and then we also obviously got to cast the Itzquinth that turn as well to get another threat in play. So I will watch that back to see if there was anything I could have done slightly better, but I feel in the moment I'm just going to have to chalk that one down to bad variance. But yeah, that is pretty frustrating. Them getting a 1-outer, and then not only that, but putting them to 1 and them having exact lethal. But, it is what it is. Happens sometimes. This hand looks pretty good though, right? We got Halfling on 1, into Huatli on 2. We got Carnosaur, we got Oliphant if we keep missing land drops, and we got Familiar as well. So, yeah, pretty happy with this hand. The only annoying thing is 2 Carplusen Forest is a little bit painful, but we can obviously, we can use Oliphant and Huatli to find non-pain lands. So, and the opponent's obviously mulligan twice as well, so that is rough for them this game, obviously. Especially, tempo decks I don't think mulligan particularly well, so that is going to be a big advantage in our favour. So, variance swung back in our favour this game. So yeah, I am a little bit worried about turn 1 cut down. Okay, they didn't have it. And we found a non-pain land, perfect. So, guys, run out the Huatli here. We could go for Bramble Familiar, but I like getting Huatli in play here. Just because it uses our mana a bit more efficiently. Threatens to transform as well. Applies as much pressure as the Bramble Familiar, but I think the threat of transformation is very real in this matchup. I mean, to be fair, the tempo decks typically want to play at instant speed anyway, so it's not too much of a big deal for them, but, especially if they got Halo Forager in the deck, it makes it very awkward for them to ever tap out against us, because transforming Huatli is, very, very snowbally, very potentially game-winning. Okay, opponent go for the throats, the halfling, and they miss land drops as well, so that's obviously rough for the opponent, but we'll definitely get Bramble Familiar down here, and then, you know, we threaten transforming Huatli next turn, and then casting Trumpeting Carnosaur the turn after that. I mean, having said that, if the opponent is missing land drops, it does mean that their hand is all spells, which is kind of scary. The Edict. So this is an interesting choice what we want to sack here. I think I'm going to sack the Bramble Familiar because Huatli is a bigger threat on its own. That could be incorrect, though. But my thought process there is Bramble Familiar is not doing anything next turn, whereas at least, you know, and then it needs to survive to cast Carnosaur the following turn. And if their hand is just all, you know, non-lands, it means they do have a lot of interaction. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Bramble Familiar does die the following turn. I mean, again, it's pretty close. I could definitely see an argument going the other way, but I prefer keeping Huatli in play because it represents a stronger threat in and of itself. So I could have seen an argument for potentially potentially cycling the Oliphant there, but if we drew another land off the top, which we did, I think it makes more sense to just hold because then we have 2 top-end threats. So here, you know, we could have tried activating the Huatli, but I feel like they have to have removal in hand because they've been missing land drops. It's just too risky, right? We've got them on a decent clock here. I don't think it's worth it. And then even though we do have Carnosaur as the more powerful top-end card, killing the Sleep Cursed Fairy cuts them off any potential racing they could do, right? If we kill their Sleep Cursed Fairy, there's no way they can race us, which is typically how these tempo decks try and win. And now I'm just going to jam the Oliphant. Even if they have a counter spell, I think it's fine. Oh, well, they don't. Sauron's Ransom. Okay, so opponent is in trouble here, so I think I'm just going to... You know, I don't think it really matters how I split these. Halo Forager is probably the more relevant of the 2 cards because it can actually block, so I'll give them those 2. And... yeah, you know, giving them a tap land in this spot is also pretty rough. So yeah, I feel pretty good now. Unless they hit... well, I don't even know. They would need, like... cut down into Go for the Throat, which they could have because they did miss land drops early on, so it wouldn't be unheard of for them to have that, but I feel pretty good about this spot, right? Oliphant can also buff one of our other creatures. Probably going to target its Squinth here. Wow, and Thron off the top, okay. Okay, so opponent does go for the Throat, so they do get to survive another turn here. And now the question is whether I want to go for Thron or transform the Huatli. I think... considering Arena was giving away priority there, it probably would have been safer to go for the Huatli transform just in case they're running a sweeper. But yeah, I don't think it really ends up mattering there, to be honest. So yeah, we got there. Nice. Okay, so on the play here. And... I think that hand's a little bit too slow, so I'm going to have to mull that one. This looks decent though, right? We've got 2 early mana dorks and, you know, Carnosaur as top end. Probably going to cycle this Elephant for a land. We'll have to see, you know, if we keep drawing lands, maybe not. So we're going to run out the Paleontologist here, and then next turn if it survives, or even if it doesn't survive, we can still cycle the Elephant and cast the Bramble Familiar as well. Okay, nice. So now we've got Bramble Familiar here, and then... gonna cycle the Oliphant. Actually, no, wait. That was a mistake on my part. I should have definitely cycled the Oliphant first, and then... because now we've missed out on 2 points of damage. That was just a punt on my part. My bad. Hopefully that won't end up mattering, but... either way, if we can draw another land here, we can potentially just cast Carnosaur next turn, which would be pretty big, right? Still not 100% sure what deck the opponent's on, right? We've only seen blue-white so far. Could obviously be Esper. Not really seen any other colour combinations with those. Oh, interesting. So they just go white. So definitely going to be jamming the Carnosaur here. Opponent could be on control then if they choose white, right? I assume if they're on Esper, they would have played that Crossroads on black. So obviously could be jamming a Carnosaur into a counterspell here. Oh, wow. Teferi's Contingency is like the worst possible because now that makes the Carnosaur in our hand more expensive as well. So that's really rough. Okay, opponent jams the One Ring, so a land here would be really nice. Oh, yikes. Didn't find a land. If we'd have found a land there, we could have gotten Atali down while they were tapped out, which would have been probably game-winning. I mean, obviously, if they have a Sunfall, then it's different, but, you know, that missed land drop is very, very big there. Because now they can start activating the One Ring. They've got access to mana to counter our stuff now. So I think game one against you know, counterspell heavy control is going to be tricky. But post sideboard it becomes a lot better when we can bring in the Red and Realm Breakers and the Throns as well. Obviously they're on blue white, so they'll have access to Reprieve. But you know, especially if we can get like a turn 2 random realm breaker down, that's going to be really tricky for them to beat off a halfling. So thankfully we do get to exile the Carnosaur with the Paleontologist to be able to cast it from the graveyard, but it still retains the taxing effect from the counterspell. So here we could obviously cast a Tali, but I want to use the Carnosaur from my graveyard while the Paleontologist is still around, right? If they kill the Paleontologist, then we lose the ability to cast it from the graveyard. So they have a reprieve. So yeah, I think this one's going to be tricky to win now, right? They can just keep activating the ring, keep finding more counterspells, and our hand is just, you know, expensive cards that we can only cast one of per turn. So like I said, I think game 1 against counterspell control is always going to be tricky. Although having said that, if we'd have hit an untapped land and been able to cast a Tali while they were tapped out, that could have potentially been game winning. Again, if they have a sweeper, then maybe not. But, you know, that could have been a way that we could have stolen game 1 in a tricky matchup. But yeah, post sideboard, I think we've got a much better chance. Yeah, I would be shocked if we won this one now. I assume they've got some way to offset the life loss here, like Union of the Third Path, and so they'll just keep drawing more counter spells and stopping us casting our top end. So yeah, this is going to be a tricky one to win. If they didn't have the One Ring, then we could potentially run them out of counter spells here, but you know, they're really going to start snowballing the game now. Yeah, there's the Union of the Third Path, so but they're basically never going to die to the damage from the One Ring. I mean, we'll have to see what their win condition is. Maybe we can deck them out, potentially. But yeah, I very much doubt they're going to run out of counter spells at this point. Now, if we draw another card that isn't super expensive, we could potentially try and, you know, just attack them with the Mana Dorks. But if they have, or I assume they have 4 Union of the Third Path, it's going to be really difficult to try and do that. But yeah, I mean, maybe if we can cut them off their win conditions somehow, like we'll have to see what they are playing for win conditions, but maybe we can get them to deck out. But I you know, with the Union of the Third Path, and I assume they've got a handful of counterspells, it's going to be very tricky to do here. So, like I said, I think now we've drawn Huatli, I'm gonna not just keep jamming, you know, expensive cards. Okay, they do contingency the Huatli as well, but now we at least get to attack in for 6 here. And then could cast the Bramble Familiar, but I don't know, maybe I'm supposed to cast the Bramble Familiar and just hope they don't have a sweeper and just keep attacking, maybe. Maybe that's my line to win. Yeah, I think that probably would have been better actually thinking about it, because the logic for holding on to Bramble Familiar is that it's another top-end threat, and with the One Ring activating every turn, then we're not really going to be able to run them out of counter spells. Okay, they do have Sunfall, so I don't think we would have... I mean, the play I went for is slightly better against Sunfall, but considering they have it, I think we're probably not going to be able to win this one either way. I mean, I'm still going to play it out because I think there's a chance, a very small chance, that we can potentially deck them out, or at least I want to keep playing until we see what their win condition is, so we have a bit more information going into game 2. So definitely going to cycle the Generosent here, and then I think we're forced to play the Bramble Familiar out here so that we at least can, you know, potentially cast an Atali or a Carnosaur next turn. But yeah, I'd be very, very surprised if we ended up winning this one now. But yeah, I'm going to keep playing just to see what their win condition is. Because if they keep having to discard the hand size, we will get to see a big portion of their deck as well. Even outside of the win conditions, we'll get to see what sort of interaction they're running. Okay, Teferi, so that, I assume that'll be their win condition. And Teferi plus the One Ring is, you know, it's no joke. I mean, we can kill both the Teferi and the token with our Carnosaurs, especially if they wait to activate the One Ring. If they do choose to activate the One Ring here, I think just to buy time, we're probably forced to Carnosaur the token here, just to try and get more information of their deck. But if they just pass here, I'm going to just pass back, and I assume they'll activate the ring during my end step, at which point we can use our 2 Carnosaurs, one to kill the Teferi, one to kill the token. Again, this isn't a winning line, but I just want to see as much of their deck as possible before going to game 2, just to get more information. So let's see, the opponent could have, you know, if they've got like the 2 mana the 3 mana draw 2, like quick study, they could potentially fizzle the Carnosaur, but it looks like they don't have that. Or maybe they just don't want to cast it if they do. But yeah, either way, this just slows them down so that we hopefully just get to see more of their deck is essentially the plan here. And then we obviously do have enough mana to cast a Tali, but there's no way they're not going to have a counterspell in hand after drawing this many cards. And then they do get to animate the incubation tokens, so they are representing some kind of clock, but we should at least get to see a good amount of their deck because they have to discard the hand size here. Okay, there's another Teferi. I mean, 24 cards left in the deck. Maybe if they get too lost in the source, they might accidentally deck themselves. That could be... that's probably my most likely route to victory here. And they do activate the ring during the main phase. I guess that's to play around Carnosaur again, but they're going to have to discard a bunch to hand size here. So Teferi goes up to 8 loyalty. They get an 8/8 in play. Union of the Third Path, gain 18. Not bad. But yeah, mainly just doing this just to see what their deck is. So far, you know, nothing too out of the ordinary, I think. One ring plus Teferi is a pretty nice combo. Union of the Third Path obviously works very well with the one ring. And then the rest just looks like counter spells, Soul Partition, Sunfall. Okay, interesting to see Silver Scrutiny. I mean, we do get to resolve an Atali here, so... Okay, I was hoping to hit something crazy from their deck. Like, if I'd hit a Teferi, that would have been nice. Doors of Durin... Okay, Doors of Durin into Itzquith is interesting, right? We can... If they kill the Atali here, which I assume they do, and we survive, we could potentially haste the Itzquith out, but... You know, they presumably activate the one ring here, turn their token into a 16/16, kill the Atali, and then we're just dead, right? And they can also... take an extra turn off the Teferi, so we're almost certainly dead here unless the opponent messes up, but still useful to get information about what the opponent's playing. Well, they minus the Teferi. That has to be a mistake, right? If they're planning to activate the one ring, because they could just take 2 turns and guarantee the win here. 6 cards left in the deck, though. If they if they accidentally activate the ring again somehow, then we might steal a win here, but yeah, okay, they still partition, then we're just dead on board. But like I said, I think, you know, game 1 against counterspell heavy control is going to be pretty bad, but post sideboard, get these Wrens in, get the Thruns in, and it should improve quite a lot. Since they're on the one ring, I'm also going to bring in a couple of Haywire Mites as well, I think, and then we have got quite a lot to cut here. Atali is just too expensive, I think. You know, we could have potentially cast it, or we got close to casting it last game, but, you know, I don't think we're really interested in cards that are that expensive. And then Itzquith is obviously not great either when they're not running very many creatures. And then kind of tempted to cut Doors of Durin when we're also bringing in, you know, Thrun as extra 5 drops. So just lower the curve a little bit. Wren is definitely the best card in this matchup. Thrun is also pretty effective, although it can be stopped by Reprieve on the stack and can also be answered with Sunfall. But if they don't happen to have either of those, it's a pretty scary threat for them to deal with. But yeah, this should improve quite a lot post sideboard, I think. Wren specifically is a very, very big deal in these matchups. So obviously can't keep that one because it's all red lands. Okay, we got the Wren here, which is pretty good. Yeah, I think we're definitely going to be keeping this, and I'm going to put back probably one of the Generous Ents. You know, we essentially have 3 lands in this hand. So I think we can afford to put back the 4th here, especially because we have lowered the curve of the deck, right? Because Carnosaur is still at the top end, but, you know, Carnosaur and the Land Cyclers are all... Oh, wow, Halfling is a great draw here. But yeah, Carnosaur and all the Land Cyclers are essentially, you know, they can be used earlier in the game as well. So we don't need to worry as much about getting to 7 mana. Wow, opponent kept a 1-lander. That is a very big surprise from a control deck. I mean, I respect it. It's it's a ballsy move keeping a 1-lander in a control deck, but, you know, them being stuck on 1 land when we can get Wren online is it's going to be tricky for them to recover from. But, I mean, having said that, for them to have kept a 1-lander, their hand must be nuts unless it was just a misclick. So, maybe I shouldn't be too optimistic. We'll have to see. Okay, they did find the 2nd land, so we do have a game now, but they're essentially, you know, because of the halfling, they're like 2 turns behind me on mana now. So I'm definitely going to keep upticking this run. I think if we can ever ultimate the Ren, it's basically impossible for them to deal with without Farewell being in the format. I mean, again, they could have Soul Partition for the Ren. So maybe minusing it to get value could be a possibility. But if they do have to spend their turn using Soul Partition on the Ren, they're really behind on board here, right? And they're, you know, Divine Purge isn't in the format anymore. Sunfall is probably the cheapest sweeper that they're running. I actually can't remember if there's a 4-mana sweeper. Maybe there is a 4-mana sweeper in white. But I can't really remember off the top of my head if there is or not. But either way, you know, since they're very far away from a sweeper, I think I'm just going to commit to the board here, right? Just get all my creatures down, get a ton of pressure in play. Now we've got a pretty fast clock. We can also just recast the Ren next turn with Uncounterable. Yeah, opponent just scoops up. So that was a bit of a non-game. Opponent kept a sketchy hand, which, you know, I've kept my good amount of one-landers in my time, but never on a control deck. So maybe that was a misclick from the opponent. We'll have to... Well, I guess we'll never find out, but... Game 3, obviously on the draw is going to be trickier, but, you know, Ren should really help, as I said. Lowering the curve should really help. Thrun should help as well. And to be honest, a lot of the other cards in the deck are pretty good as well, right? Huatli is good if it doesn't get countered, right? We can immediately get value off it with the land, and then if the opponent ever does tap out, flipping that into the Saga is also going to be really, really powerful. Actually, thinking about it, maybe I'm supposed to keep in 1 Atali, but I mean, even then, it's such a fringe scenario. I think it's going to be really tricky to effectively transform the Huatli because the opponent's always going to hold open removal for a lot of the game, so... No, I think I am pretty happy cutting the Atalis in this matchup. So, no turn 1 halfling, but we've got the Ren and Realm Breaker here. And I mean, again, this hand is a little bit sketchy. Wow, opponent has Sleep Curse Fairy. Okay, I mean, that's a pretty good way to attack down Ren, I guess. Yeah, that's actually pretty good against my hand. That's not a bad move from the opponent. I guess, yeah, bringing that in against Planeswalker seems pretty nice. Especially because it gives you something to do with your mana if you don't have, like, a generically good play to do. So, interesting, yeah. I mean, we do have Carnosaur that can kill it, but the Ward 2 means that we can't do that before turn 5 at the earliest. Okay, opponent uses Scatter Ray on the Bramble Familiar. But yeah, that Sleepcast Fairy is an issue here. I think I'm just going to jam the Ren, though, right? We can't use the Carnosaur. If they have a counterspell for this, so be it. If they don't, they can just untap the Sleepcast Fairy and attack it down. I don't think I want to just... It's tricky. I'm kind of tempted to minus here just to get value off it, but then it dies immediately. At least this way we can get in for some damage and force them to attack down the Ren here. Maybe it's better to minus just to get value. I'm honestly not sure, but yeah, they've countered my sideboard plan pretty effectively. I guess they got good information out of game 2 there. So yeah, maybe I'm supposed to minus, but because, you know, unlike another tempo deck, or unlike the more all-in Sleepcast Fairy tempo decks, I don't think they're ever really going to be able to race us. Unless they just have counterspell into counterspell for the whole game, really. But so maybe I'm supposed to minus the Ren just to get value off it. Because diverting the Sleepcast Fairy damage from face to the Ren doesn't really make a huge difference here. Okay, at least we get to resolve the Hulking Raptor here. That's pretty big. But yeah, I'm thinking I was maybe supposed to use the Ren minus instead of plussing here. Because, I mean, we have got in for 6 damage. Oh, sorry. Is it 6? Yeah, 6 damage so far. I mean, that was largely undone by the union of the third path, but... So yeah, maybe I'm supposed to minus the Ren. I'll have to, you know, go back, rewatch and think about that one. Okay, interesting. So I think I'm just going to hardcast the Carnosaur here. Actually, wait, that was a misplay. I should have played the Copperline Gorge instead. I think I've got so you know, used to playing around stuff like Draw Disruption and Censor that I've always got at the back of my mind. It's always useful having the mana available. So yeah, I think I was supposed to Copperline Gorge there. Again, there's also an argument to maybe not attacking because they can obviously trade up with the Sleep Curse Fairy, but the Fairy dying makes Ren and Realm Breaker a much better draw as the game goes on. You know, if that Fairy is just there all game, not only are they eventually going to kill us with it, but they're also going to invalidate Ren and Realmbreaker as a future top deck. And we already have enough mana to cast the Carnosaurs in our hand, and that's basically the top end of our deck anyway, so we don't really need the extra mana off the Raptor. So even though trading Raptor with the Fairy might seem like a bad exchange, I think it's worth doing at that point, because, you know, if we're not attacking, we're not applying pressure, and we don't really need the mana, and we also want Ren and Realmbreaker to be a good top deck as the game goes on. But yeah, I definitely misplayed with the Copperline Gorge, because that could come up, you know, if I need that mana untapped later, that could be pretty important. Wow, speaking of which, we did draw the Ren and Realmbreaker, so interesting whether I want to go for that or the Carnosaur. I think I'm just going to go for the Ren and Realmbreaker here, and it resolves. Okay, so they might... the reason I wanted to go for Ren and Realmbreaker there is that I feel like they could very well have Scatter Ray, right? We saw that last game that they have Scatter Ray in the deck, and they could have potentially dug for that off the Impulse, and that doesn't answer the Ren and Realmbreaker, because they know about the Carnosaur. They were probably digging for a counterspell to answer it, so I think it makes more sense to go for the Ren. And we also, because of that, found a turn to get that Copperline Gorge into play tapped. Oh, wow. Okay, that's a sick draw here. I'm going to go for the Carnosaur first, though, instead. Okay. So I would rather have the Carnosaur countered than the Doors of Durin. I'm not going to plus a land in case they have Sunfall here, but Doors of Durin plus Ren and Realmbreaker is sick here, because if we can resolve that, we can just keep plussing our lands to trigger the Doors of Durin, and the land has Hexproof, so it's really tricky for the opponent to deal with that. They do have Teferi, which is a bit of an issue. I mean, we do have the Carnosaur as an answer to Teferi here. Actually, yeah, that's pretty sick, because we can plus the Ren and Realmbreaker, play the Doors of Durin, and still have mana available to activate the Carnosaur in response to the attack. So I'm going to do that. They could have another Scatter Ray or a Reprieve here, obviously, which would effectively counter the Doors of Durin, but if they don't, it's going to be really tricky, because if they have single target creature removal, the land has Hexproof, so it's going to be really tricky for them to stop. We can attack Teferi, see what we hit, and then potentially use Carnosaur to kill the 2/2 token before blocks, to guarantee kill the Teferi. They can only put the Teferi up to 3 loyalty because of the ring. Okay, sick. We hit Generous End. That's really solid. So now we can attack Teferi with 2 creatures. See if the opponent's willing to trade here or not. If they do offer the trade with the land, I think I'll just take that. And then we get to hold on to the Carnosaur, which is pretty big. They could obviously also have removal spell like a Soul Partition for the Generous End, and then block with the 2/2, but then we can just use the Carnosaur to kill the Teferi, and they can't activate the 1 ring then either, so I feel like we've worked ourselves into a really good position here, and I'm very glad. I think the key turning point in this game, obviously the Ren and Realmbreaker and Doors of Durin top decks were very big for us, but getting rid of that Sleep Curse Fairy earlier was a very big deal, I think. So we get to kill Teferi, which is huge here, and now I'm just going to pass till the end step. I assume they're going to activate the 1 ring, right? If they don't, I'm pretty happy. So if they do, we'll just use the Carnosaur in response. And I think it's important to wait here, because they could potentially be running Consider, and if they, you know, if I tried to kill the token during the main phase and they went activate 1 ring into Consider, we just get completely blown out. Now we're representing the Ren ult, and like I said, without Farewell in the format, or without them having Graveyard Hate, I think the Ren ult is going to be so hard for them to beat. So they basically have to find Soul Partition on Ren here would be really rough. Or I guess Get Lost if they're playing that. We didn't see that game 1, but that could be another answer for Ren. But if they don't kill the Ren before we get to untap with it, getting the ultimate off here is probably going to be good enough for us to win, right? We can just immediately recast the Ren, plus a land, attack, trigger the Doors of Durin again. But yeah, if they do have an answer to the Ren, then we're in trouble again, because then, you know, they could also kill the Generous End, which stops us triggering the Doors of Durin, and then we're just completely left at the mercy of the top of our deck. But even with 1 ring in play, I think they're really going to struggle to beat the Ren ult. Okay, they do have a Sunfall, but as long as they don't have a Soul Partition here, I think we're good. Okay, we get to ult the Ren. That's huge. That's huge. So now we get the emblem. We can just immediately recast the Ren from our graveyard. Even if they have a counterspell for this, we can just recast it. I guess if they have contingency, that would be rough because it makes it 5 mana. Wow, they don't though. That's huge. So now we can just plus on a land. I don't think blue-white has any way to kill hexproof creatures, right? They don't have Shieldred's Edict or anything like that. And then not only do we get to attack with the mountain, but we also trigger the Doors of Durin here. Wow, and we hit Haywire Might. Okay, sick. So now now we get to now we get to answer their One Ring as well. So that's, I mean, obviously we have more high impact cards that we could hit, but cutting them off the One Ring is going to make it really hard for them to climb back out of this game. I mean, even if they were drawing a bunch off the One Ring, I still think it's going to be almost impossible for them to stop the run ult here unless they happen to have Graveyard Hate, which I don't imagine they would, because Graveyard Hate is just not good against the rest of our deck other than the Paleontologist. But yeah, we get to take out their ring, and then I kind of want to... I feel like we're so far ahead now that I just need to play around more stuff. We could run out the Haywire Might, but I don't want to do that in case they Sunfall to exile it and then play another ring. So I'm just going to run out the Raptor here. Even if they, use a removal spell to kill the Raptor and then attack down the Wren, we can just recast the Wren immediately from the graveyard. So getting the Raptor in here, getting the Raptor in play here is nice because it just unlocks more stuff that we can play from our graveyard. Okay, another Teferi is not bad for the opponent, but I still think it's going to be tricky for them to play through now. Now they don't have the One Ring. Had we not hit that Haywire Might, them having Ring plus Teferi would have potentially been quite tricky for us to play through, but now that we've got rid of the One Ring, I think it's going to be very difficult for them. We can cast Carnosaur from the graveyard here. They don't have any counter spells by the looks of things. Wow, we hit a Thron. I mean, again, if they have Sunfall, that's not really going to get the job done, but I'm just debating whether I want to run out a second Wren here. Right, we could go Wren and Plus again. Maybe that's better, actually. But we do get a Doors of Durin trigger, and I think even post-sideboard... Oh, wow. I was going to say even post-sideboard, we're very likely to hit off the doors. Okay, we did hit. But that's not a guaranteed kill of Teferi, so maybe I'm supposed to play the second Wren here. That was potentially a mistake on my part. Because now the Teferi isn't guaranteed to die, right? They can just block the Raptor and the mountain. Okay, they let the Teferi die, so it didn't end up mattering. But yeah, I definitely think there's a good argument to going... Play the second Wren... plus again, get another land in play just in case we whiffed off the doors, because we kind of did there, right? We only hit Halfling. Having said that, if we hit any other card other than Halfling or Haywire Might, that is a guaranteed way to kill Teferi, although I guess they could have had creature removal. So yeah, thinking back on it, it probably was correct in that turn to play out the second Wren, animate another land, and just attack Teferi down. Wow, okay, Chrome Host Seed Shark, so... I mean, I don't think that's going to be good enough, but that is a way that they can start to dominate the board a little bit more. So they brought an interesting sideboard plan from the opponent. That is a pretty good way to counteract the Wren from our side, I think. So I think that's good sideboarding from the opponent, but drawing that is a little bit too late now, I think. So we can use the mana to get Carnosaur again, see what we hit. Well, okay, we hit another Wren, so I can just put that one into hand. Again, maybe I'm supposed to play that and just animate another land here, but happy to just attack with everything. We get another Doors trigger. Paleontologist is fine. It's better to get a creature than not. So play sideboard it, your fail rate with Doors goes down, or goes up slightly because you're bringing in Wren and Realm Breakers over creatures, but the main deck is so creature heavy that it doesn't really make too much of a difference. That's one of the main reasons I'm very high on running such a creature-heavy main deck. You're super consistent with Doors game 1, and then post-sideboard you can afford to sub out some creatures for non-creatures and still have it be consistent. So yeah, I mean, opponent's still trying to fight through here, but I just think it's impossible here, especially because we got, Doors of Durin plus Wren going. So opponent makes a bunch of blocks, but again, we can just replay everything that dies from the graveyard. So we get to take out one of their tokens, put them down to 4, and then we can just, recast the Halfling, recast the Paleontologist. So I think I did make a couple of mistakes. I'm not going to run out the Haywire Might again, just in case they go Sunfall into Ring, but maybe I'm supposed to. Maybe I'm so far ahead that I just want to force through as much damage as possible here. So I think I did potentially make a couple of misplays, but thankfully, as you can see, Wren is so strong in this matchup that it managed to get us there anyway. So yeah, we got there. Nice.